Good Tuesday evening, folks. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandagis. Welcome to Hurricane Hub Live. It is June the 23rd. We're 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks into the Atlantic hurricane season, and all is quiet out there in the basin right now. Let's get to it. Here's what we're going to be covering today. Again, the Atlantic all quiet right now. The basin remains void of any sort of tropical activity, any areas of interest, any tropical waves. We're pretty much dominated by Saharan dust and just overall stable environmental conditions there. Now, there is the possibility of some Pacific development there. It's already been a rather active season in the eastern Pacific with 3 named storms already on the list notched off. And there's the possibility of 2 more. There are 2 areas of interest in the Pacific that we'll talk about coming on up. And 3 weeks into the hurricane season, what's next? What can we look forward to as we get into July? What areas do we look towards for possible tropical development at that part of the season? Now, we saw our first named storm, Arthur, in the Atlantic basin back on June 17th, so almost a week ago. Typically, when you look at climatology, the last 30 years or so sees the second named storm on or around July the 17th. So almost a month gap between the first named storm and the second named storm. Is this written in stone? No. Could certainly happen much earlier than that or much later, depending on the overall conditions. And then you jump ahead. Notice how the gaps get smaller and smaller as you get deeper into the season, as you get closer to the peak of the season. As you go from the 15th, a week later, you see the 4th and the 5th named storms according to climatology. All right, the names so far that we've gone through is just Arthur. That's been it. We had a tropical storm. It was around for a whole 12 hours last week when it was named, maxed out at 45-mile-per-hour winds, long gone. Next up would be Bertha. Now, typically, you know, the first several names of a season are typically not remembered because they're not very impactful or overall, I guess you could say, historic. But you go back 2 years ago, 2024, to the B-named storm, Beryl. That one's always going to be remembered because that was the earliest Category 5 storm on record. You remember that one developed in the main development region, which was pretty unusual. It developed on June the 28th, so in June as well. And it pretty much carried all the way through the Caribbean, became a Category 5 there, and then moved up into the Gulf and eventually made landfall in southeast Texas. But by that point, thankfully, it did weaken. It was still a Category 1 when it made landfall. But regardless, Bertha's up next. We'll see what that one does. Could it be a big one? It could be. Most likely not, though. Most B-named storms just get recycled because they never really get retired. All right, sea surface temperature anomalies, we're warming things up. Notice the subtropics are extremely warm, anomalously warm here, where you're seeing the shades of yellow and orange and red. Those are sea surface temperatures that are above the seasonal normal for this time of the year, or the average for this time of the year. A lot of warmth in the subtropics here, and then a lot of cool temperatures here in the northern Atlantic. And then down in the main development region where we would need to see very, very warm temperatures starting to kick into high gear here. I mean, we've got some warmth, but notice as you get closer to the Cabo Verde Islands, we've got a cool pool, relatively speaking, a little bit below normal, below average in terms of sea surface temperatures there. And a reason why we're kind of not warming up as much right now is because we do have plumes of Saharan dust, which I'll show you in a minute. We've got several plumes, a pretty good volume of them rolling off the African coastline. And then you get to the eastern Pacific. Very evident here, the El Nino is ramping up. The equatorial regions of the Pacific, they're off the coast of South America, very, very warm. And that's spreading pretty much through all of the El Nino regions from west to east. And then you go north of the equator, you get into the tropics, subtropics in the eastern Pacific. Very, very warm. And this is likely going to help produce an above normal season in the eastern Pacific and probably slightly increase the probability of seeing impacts in places like Hawaii. And if they curve up along the coast of California, the Baja California Sur here, and maybe even getting up into the southwestern portion of the United States, at least some remnants bringing the rainy season, the monsoon season, over to the southwest parts of the country. All right, let's go over to the Saharan dust now. Currently, we've got a pretty large plume here encompassing most of the western main development region. A few areas of dust, too, working over into the Caribbean here. But notice as we go out in time here, we get a little lull and then more plumes coming off the coast of Africa there. And here we are right ahead of 4th of July, another pretty intense, pretty thick plume there. And what this works to do is absorb the sunlight and deflect some of it, and that stops the sea surface temperatures from absorbing that warmth from the sun and warming on up. So this could limit the sea surface temperatures warming up pretty significantly in the early parts of the season like we're seeing out there now. So Atlantic tropical activity, of course, June is relatively quiet. There are years that it's more active. 2020 is an example. July is a little more active, but still not much going on out there. As you get over to mid-August, it starts to ramp up. Typically around August 15th, we call that the start of the ramp up of the season. And September 10th is the climatological peak of hurricane season before slowly getting less active as we move through October. But still, most of September, most of October sees a good amount of activity before it comes to an end, November the 30th. So as we get into July, what areas do we look for that kind of open for business for some development? As we saw in June, the Gulf is always open. The entire season, this is going to be an area that could produce a tropical system, tropical storm, tropical wave, hurricane, that sort of thing. Western Caribbean, also still open for business. Also, what we saw in June was the Southwest Atlantic. That is still in play as we head over into July. But in July, something changes. The main development region, especially middle parts of the month, starts to open on up and wake up. We get waves of tropical seedlings, if you will, coming off the coast of Africa. African easterly waves, we call them. And as they hit the main development region, if conditions are conducive, they can start to develop there. And this would be the starting point of long track tropical systems. And typically these areas here and even the far eastern portion of the main development region is the breeding ground for some of our major storms as we get into the season. So always an area to keep a close eye on. All right, coming up after a quick break, we've got to look at the Eastern Pacific and Hurricane Hub trivia, too, coming up in just a little while. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Hurricane Hub Live. Here's a look at the Eastern Pacific. There are two areas of interest right now, both tagged orange, meaning there's moderate chances of them developing into the next named systems. We've got one very large area here near the Clipperton Islands, 40% chance there. And to the north, another area of interest that's got slightly higher odds, 50% in the short term and also 50% chance over the next 7 days as well. So multiple areas to watch here. Next names on the list would be Douglas and Alida. We've already gone through Amanda, Boris, and Christina. All three have been tropical storms, so no hurricanes yet in the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic Basin so far. So our scorecard looks like this. One named storm so far in the Atlantic, that was Arthur last week, and then 3 in the Eastern Pacific. So, of course, the Eastern Pacific is winning. No hurricanes yet. Of course, no major hurricanes either. That's the latest in the Eastern Pacific. We may get 2 other named storms here in the next couple of days. We'll keep an eye on it, but again, nowhere near any land, so that's some good news. Coming up after a quick break, we've got an interview with a storm preparedness and evacuation expert. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Thanks for sticking with us and sticking around for Hurricane Hub Live. All right, today on Live Impact News, Connor Reel spoke to an expert about hurricane evacuation preparedness. Let's take a quick listen.
We are going to take some time to speak with a special guest, Dr. Brian Wolshin, joining us, a professor of engineering at Louisiana State University, LSU. We'll give him a Go Tigers, Dr. Wolshin, as we welcome you on. I can't quite get the Go Tigers. Like, I can't fully embody the right spirit of the Go Tigers, but we're happy to have you here nonetheless. I'm Connor, and again, thank you for joining Live Impact News. We're talking about some of those hurricane preparedness and hurricane safety options once a natural disaster does strike, and we're really kind of focusing on evacuation here as we talk to Dr. Wolshin. Now, I'm wondering if we can at least speak to this first and foremost before we dive into the questions. Do you find that evacuation orders are given their proper due and respect by those who they're directed towards on a general basis?
Sorry to give you this answer, but yes and no. I think that people are definitely, as we know, evacuations are disruptive and inconvenient and costly, and no one likes them. But when faced with a life and death threat, absolutely, we've seen over and over that people will evacuate. They have to feel that level of threat before they do so, and sometimes that happens a little bit late. And it's not always ideal from a traffic movement standpoint, but I think by and large, if there's a threat, people still, thank goodness, will respond appropriately.
Okay, so that I would say, like you said, good and bad news. But ultimately, when things do rise to the level, people tend to listen, which is good because it, of course, is for their safety. Now, once you get people to decide to evacuate, or once you let people know that they need to evacuate, well, now there's a whole nother degree of obstacle to clear, which is a safe and well-organized evacuation. The first place a lot of people's minds go to is, what are the roads going to look like if everyone else around here is getting the same message that we are? Yes. How does evacuation timing, decision-making, and process affect traffic congestions, and what type of issue has this presented based on past research for safe evacuations?
Wow, great question. A lot to unpack there, but really quickly, let me try to break this down. What happens is it's what we call a threat response process. So when people feel threatened, they respond. And then what we have to look at, what we try to understand is when they leave, where they're leaving from, where they're going to, and then the routes that they're going to take. So the routes that they choose to take vary based on a lot of things, and it's really based primarily on travel time and availability. So people like to take the routes that they're familiar with, that they know where they're going and they know what the conditions are going to be. That's been helped a lot by navigational devices and things that give us ideas of travel time, like Waze or Google Maps and on, those types of things. But the issues that happen is that we have a lot of people moving basically in one or an outbound, we'll call it, direction. And they're doing it over a very short amount of time, meaning that usually when people are motivated to go, that motivates other people to go. So we have this, what we call a directional surge, that the roads are not designed to accommodate. Roads, by and large, and if you look at Norfolk, Newport News area, all those roads in that area are really meant to provide capacity for the movement of traffic during two periods of the day. That's the morning peak hour or peak period and the evening peak period. What we see with evacuation traffic is that you can almost take that peak period and make it last 8, 10, 12 hours, sometimes even more than that. So there's a lot of techniques that we try to encourage. I've done it through research and we've done it through study, and we see that these are very effective for moving traffic.
Can we go through some of those techniques and explore what the most important ones are?
Yeah, that's a great question. The most important thing is individual decision making. So, is with good communications and letting people know here's what we anticipate, they can make good decisions to leave early or to take alternate routes. That's number one. And that's something that people can do on their own. In terms of what maybe the police or law enforcement or the state DOT can do, they can use things like contraflow, which is where they reverse the flow of the inbound lanes to get more lanes flowing outbound. That takes a lot of planning and forethought, and it takes a lot of management and control manpower. So, that's it's not easy to do, but it can be used. Some of the other things that we see where you have a lot of bridges, tolls will be waived. Sometimes what will happen is traffic signals will be modified to give priority to or facilitate movements in, again, the outbound direction. Or sometimes they put in the opposite restrictions so that you don't have a lot of people waiting to make turns. It might be more inconvenient for some individuals, but in the aggregate, on the whole, it moves more people more efficiently.
Okay, I think the most important thing that I've taken there is that there are strategies, there are things that can be done, but like you said, it takes a lot of organization, effort, foresight, which is also what we preach when it comes to hurricane preparedness in general. So, you certainly hope that as every single citizen is taking those steps, so are the people who are in charge of making sure that everybody's safe. If we're all doing that, then hopefully everybody can make it through these natural disasters in a safe way. You mentioned something that I want to go back to, which is that a lot of people choose routes based on familiarity. But does that not go out the window when we're in a totally and completely unfamiliar situation? And would you encourage people to maybe abandon that principle as they make their decisions?
Yes. So the phrase that you used is, does that go out the window? Look, if it's life and death, most things go out the window because what you're trying to do is you're trying to stay alive and preserve your safety and your loved one's safety. So what we have now is a lot of good technology. On everybody's phone, you have things like Google Maps and Waze, and they will suggest, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with, they will suggest routes that are faster for travel time, are less congested. One of the issues or the problems that we see in evacuations is that the scope and the scale is so large that even things that happen far away can propagate back and cause problems, or routes that look to be open and clear now become congested by the time people get to those locations. So the idea that we always encourage people is, if you can, leave early. And this is nothing new for anybody. If you leave early, usually what you can do is, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be convenient. It's not like a normal commute. But at least you're going to keep moving. The principle that we want to avoid at all costs is to have people, A, not be able to get out because traffic isn't moving, or B, choose not to evacuate because they feel or that they see that traffic isn't moving. So as engineers, as someone who has researched this topic, there's a lot of moving parts to this, if you will, for good decisions to be made. But it takes forethought and planning and preparedness, as you said.
It really seems like that's the key. I mean, with all of the technicalities that need to be adhered to and the different strategies that there are, that preparation, that forethought really seems to be at the foundation of making sure this works for everybody. Is there any final piece of advice that you would want to give to our viewers before we let you go?
Yes, by far. And we, as you were talking about, Coach O here at LSU with Go Tigers, he does a commercial for us here in Louisiana. They call it Getting a Game Plan. And what that encourages every citizen to do is to go to the website for your emergency preparedness agency, look at the maps, know where you're going to go, plan in advance, and most importantly, to answer your question, listen when authorities tell you you need to go. These are not decisions that are made off the cuff or without proper motivation. So if they're telling you to go, you go, because it's a life safety decision. It's not just convenience or whether you have electricity and air conditioning. It could be life and death. So listen and pay attention and act accordingly.
All right. Well, Dr. Walsh, we really appreciate your time.
All right, HHL is back after a quick break. Well, for states in the South, specifically along the coast, are more likely to see direct hits from tropical storms and hurricanes. But when it comes to the mid-Atlantic, meteorologist Taylor Stephenson explains why they often avoid the big hits.
When a hurricane moves ashore, the intersection of the storm center with the coastline is the landfall. If you check out the landfalls from 1851 to 2023, you'll quickly see that Maryland and Delaware have each been hit directly twice. Florida and Texas are the states that have taken the most direct hits from hurricanes. North Carolina has had many landfalls, and New York has been hit several times too. So why the break for the Mid-Atlantic? Geographically, the Mid-Atlantic region is concave. In order for a hurricane to make landfall here, it needs to move northwest or westward. Now, the winds aloft that steer hurricanes typically blow from the west or the southwest across our region. But if those winds are weak or high pressure in the Atlantic is to our north or northeast, look out. That was the case back in 2003 when Hurricane Isabel came in over Ocracoke, North Carolina. We took a hard hit, but the storm could have easily moved farther north along the Outer Banks, or worse yet, coming over Virginia Beach or at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. Had that happened, the region might be vastly different than it is today. And just because we haven't had a direct hit recently doesn't mean it can't happen. For 13 News Now, I'm meteorologist Taylor Stephenson.
All right, it's time for tonight's hurricane trivia. All right, my question is, in what year was the first hurricane hunter mission flown? Was it 1972, 1943, 1955, or 1967? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on HHL. Remember, scan the QR code to download the 13 News Now Hurricane Guide. It's got information on supplies you should have on hand, emergency numbers you should also know, and a whole bunch of other helpful information that we have on that Hurricane Hub website there. Remember, HHL is every weekday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night, Wednesday at 8 p.m.